Paul, just tell them your name to the camera, the spelling of your name, and where you're from, and just your background by yourself.
Thank you. Paul Bleau. I'm from Quebec City. My name is spelled B-L-E-A-U, pronounced B-L-O-W. And so I studied at McGill University. I'm currently a teacher in a college. I teach business administration. And previous to that, I had a long career in business. I owned an ad agency. I did that for over 25 years. And currently I'm doing quite a bit of research around the JFK assassination.
Thanks. Now, okay, so I stumbled onto you, not just in Destiny Betrayed, but some other previous places that I've seen you before.
Black Op Radio, maybe?
Maybe, yes, yes. And I've always thought that your focus come together closer.
No, look at the camera, or kind of angle toward the camera a little, or cheat a little toward the camera.
That's a tough director. I thought maybe one of your areas that you focused on was the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and possibly, and this is a hazy memory of Oswald possibly, or a double ending up in Canada.
Not the double in Canada,
okay,
but Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, your attraction to this, was it the French connection in New Orleans for you as a Quebec French-speaking resident? I mean, what was your original attraction towards the
Fair Play for Cuba Committee?
Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Yeah, so first thing is, I always thought that when Oswald went to Russia, it was on a false defector program.
Right.
Okay, and
I agree.
Right. Okay, so then he comes back.
One of 13. He's not alone.
No, he's not. He's not alone.
Right.
There's some others. I don't know quite the number, but he's not the only Marine.
There's a couple of Marines.
Yeah, who ended up going to Russia on a false defector program.
And also spread out. Bulgaria, Romania. It wasn't just Russia, from what I remember. They spread them out.
That's right.
Okay.
And so, I mean, the way he entered Russia, the equipment he had, like a Minex camera, the contacts he had, so on and so forth. You look at it and see, well, this is a profile of someone who's on a mission, right? And so for me, when all of a sudden he strangely goes from Dallas down to New Orleans and foolishly starts representing the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Maybe you can explain what that is to the audience.
Yeah, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee was founded in 1960 by a bunch of intellectuals. On the founders list, you had names like Truman Capote, Saft, and mostly intellectuals. Some people think it was a CIA creation from the start.
Right.
I haven't gone that far, to be able to say that, but I can tell you this much: it was heavily infiltrated from the start. And so the point being,
possibly even Ted Cruz's father.
Well,
from what we've learned recently, I mean, there's photos of him at some of these demonstrations.
Yeah, but
and he ends up in Canada, Paul.
Oh, does he? Well,
yes.
That's where Ted was born.
Ted was born up there. Well, the father defected from Cuba and had oil connections and ends up in Toronto.
I did not know that, but I will say that I am agnostic to that.
Okay.
I think Ted Cruz is from Alberta. I mean, he spent a lot of time in Alberta.
He was born in
Alberta.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So is he even allowed to be president? Or?
Well, apparently you can. Yeah, there's some caveats.
Schwarzenegger.
There's a couple of caveats, but I think the reality of it was that his father was a spook who was brought from Cuba after the fall of Castro, and ended up eventually in Dallas, Texas, working for Bush Oil.
I did not know that.
Okay, I thought you
I did not know that.
You learn something every day at America's Untold Stories.
Okay, well, I'll be watching that.
Okay.
But getting back now to the FPCC, doing it in New Orleans, right? You're talking about a city that was dependent on Southwest trade. Okay, it's not the place that you want to be saying, "Hey, I'm pro-Castro," right? The example I often give is it would be like saying, "Hey, you know what? Let's start a fair play for Al-Qaeda after 9/11 in New York, and I'm going to distribute flags."
Right.
I'm not sure
well,
how
they
long.
Did try to build a mosque next to the remnants of 9/11, and people went berserk.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, I think it's less bad than, distributing flyers for, some terrorist. And
Right.
But the point being is I said, well, you got to know more about this organization, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And what I was able to find out, and I've wrote a number of articles, it is clear that when Oswald joined the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, it was a front.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's clear. But how do you demonstrate that? Well, first off, you could see that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, if you look at its history, was almost dead by 1963. Mm-hmm. Its number of members went down. They used to have like...
How many members did he have in New Orleans?
0.
Right.
0. So are we surprised?
No.
But I mean, he had, they would have nationally up to 25 meetings a year. And in 1963, the most they had was 3.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then...
So it was really in decline.
Oh, it was in decline. And
right.
the other thing that you could see is I found FBI files and FBI strategies to counter such groups. And the key means was infiltration.
Right.
So you could have a meeting. Say you had a meeting with 8 people or 9 people in your home. There's a good chance there were 4 or 5 informants in them.
That's a lot. We see that today also in certain areas.
So basically what happened is you got to a point where you said, okay, he's not only choosing the worst city, he's choosing the worst time. And where does he set up his office?
In the middle of their intelligence.
Yeah, right in the middle, at 544 Camp Street, right beside his old buddy, David Ferry. And the actual office that he took was occupied by the Cuban Revolutionary Council.
Right.
Okay.
And in fact, you see that on the manifest in JFK, that Oliver had the presence of mind to list that on the outside of the door. If you look close on that shot.
Yeah, you have a whole bunch of, bunch. It's all right wing.
Yeah.
That building is right wing.
Right. Okay? Well, Guy Bannister's in there, who he worked for.
So, and the surrounding buildings are what? It's the Secret Service, the CIA, FBI. So, kind of a strange place to set up your office.
Right.
And I truly think that flyer that revealed it was a mistake, and it got everybody really pissed. Say, hey,
we're talking about the one with the rubber stamp that said 544 Camp Street.
That's right. That's right.
It was
that's
later quickly removed.
Yeah.
From future flyers.
Yeah. So then, the importance of that, right, is that most of Oswald's leafleting at the beginning of the summer, and this is John Newman who pointed this out, was underground. It was quiet. Mm-hmm. But around August, when I think they were setting him up to become the patsy, they say, hey, become public.
Right.
That's when he gets into his fight. Mm-hmm. That's when the TV stations are all over the place. He's on the radio. He's on TV.
Well, you're talking about the fight with Carlos Bringuier.
Carlos Bringuier.
The phony confrontational event. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, so now what happens after that, right, is, try and think of this. He's interviewed, right? He's interviewed, and he's in a debate against Carlos Bringuier, and it's...
WDSU.
And it's organized by Ed Butler,
Ed Butler, who was...
with the Inca.
Inca and also Voice of America.
Yeah.
Which
is a CIA
front,
too, right? CIA front.
Yeah.
So, with probable links to a guy called David Atlee Phillips. Is that a name that rings a bell for you, David Atlee Phillips? Or
David Atlee Phillips, let me see. Western Station Chief of the CIA based out of Mexico City.
Oh, well, there you go.
Also was a bitter enemy of JFK because of the Bay of Pigs debacle by his own admission. Also a brutal alcoholic. Also the author of Night Watch.
That's right.
The novel.
That's right. Thanks. Well, I was going to say all that, but you did.
No.
No, I'm kidding. But
explain my bona fides,
Yeah, well, we'll get a beer later. But here's the thing. The importance of that, when you think of it, is you have a lone nut, right? But you have David Atlee Phillips, right? Who he ends up crossing he ends up in his neck of the woods in Mexico City.
Mm-hmm. But we don't know that.
Well,
some people. The last guy we interviewed.
No. But I mean, allegedly. Okay.
Allegedly.
So think of this station. You have Inca that is well known to David Atlee Phillips. Mm-hmm. Interviewing.
He's funding it, I think, right?
Well, I'm not sure if it's him directly.
No, I mean, but his organization.
Okay. Yeah. And on the right or left, you have Oswald. And David Atlee Phillips started a program called Santa, which was a program to use and infiltrate, CIA-wise, the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Okay?
Interesting.
And the idea also is how can we use the Fair Play for Cuba Committee even outside of the U.S. as a counter-propaganda tool. Anyway, then on the other side, who do you have? Carlos Benguier.
Mm-hmm.
And what chapter is he heading?
Oh, right. What was the name of
The
that?
DRE.
Oh, the DRE,
Who
right.
founded the DRE?
The CIA.
Who in the CIA?
David Atlee Phillips.
Yes.
Third
So,
base.
so you've got the Inca, DRE, and Santa, and then Mexico City, and I can give you so many touch points there are between this lone nut who was still 23 at the time, okay, and David Atlee Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
How many touch points do you have to start saying, hey, this seems strange?
Right.
So the whole point of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is once you get to a point, say, hey, this was a front.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other significance of this is and you probably heard it in the documentary, keep in mind that the attempt in Tampa would have set up another patsy, a guy called Policarpo Lopez.
Mm-hmm.
And what did he do a few days before the assassination? He attended Fair Play for Cuba Committee
interesting.
meetings.
This is a Cuban immigrant.
It's an exile, Cuban
Cuban exile, I'm
and
sorry,
they
yeah.
moved him from Key West all the way up to Tampa just at the right time,
Right.
sort of like with Thomas Harlover Valle for Chicago, who's moved from Long Island
That's right.
to Chicago.
Levittown.
Yeah.
Levittown, Long Island.
Yeah, and he was placed in a high, a sixth-floor building.
Ex-Marine who had served in Japan.
Yeah, on a U-2
That's right.
spy base.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sounds similar.
similar. Now, another character is Richard Case Nagel.
Okay.
Okay, Richard
The
Case.
bank robber.
The bank robber in Robin Hood. The bank shooter in the roof.
We're talking
type of
shorthand. Maybe we should explain to the audience a little bit what we're talking about.
Well, how would you explain Richard
I
Case
can't.
Okay.
I can't. He's an enigma to me, Paul. That's
He
why
is
I
an
won't-
enigma.
You know what I'm
He's a
talking about.
complicated
He's
case.
a complicated case.
He's a guy, and Garrison said he's maybe the most important
Yeah.
personality in the whole investigation. Now, Richard Case Nagel's story, he too was in the Far East.
That's right.
He says he met Oswald in the late 1950s. Okay?
In the Philippines or
No, I
at
think
Sugi?
Japan.
Oh, at Sugi.
I think in Atsugi, but
Okay.
I think in Japan. Anyway,
Okay.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
exactly. And he's a Korean War hero.
Mhm.
Okay, and he is intelligence.
Yes.
Okay.
By his own admission.
Yeah, by his own admission. So he said that the Russians, that he became a double agent, and the Russians wanted him to take Oswald out because they had heard that Oswald would be involved in a plot to kill Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he didn't go that route.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, the thing with him is he knew stuff. He knew about Oswald, and he warned about an assassination attempt before he got arrested, or after. I'm not sure exactly when, but before the assassination. But he thought that he was going to be dragged into this whole thing,
Mhm.
and that's why he said, "You know what? I don't want anything to do with this. I'm going to get myself put into jail."
Right.
But with not too much of a serious crime. I'm not going to steal anything. I'm going to fire shots. That gets you in a hell of a lot of trouble in Canada, but in the U.S., I think it's more normal. But anyway, put it this way: he fires shots. He gets arrested
In the bank.
in the bank, and
Right.
he's just waiting calmly and arrest me. And so when they search his car, what do they find in his trunk? Fair Play for Cuba flags. Okay. And he's connected to a guy called Von Marlowe.
Oh, him.
Von
Who
Marlowe.
is Von Marlowe?
Von Marlowe. He made the claims, and even Von Marlowe is a weirdo weirdo. He's a guy who had a store in L.A.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where he sold communist, gadgets and all sorts of things, and he headed the Fair Play for Cuba chapter in L.A.
Right. Okay.
And Dick Russell writes about.
Yes.
He writes about a plot to kill Kennedy in L.A. during the showing of PT. What's the name of the
PT 109.
PT 109.
Cliff Roberts.
So it's going to be the premiere. Okay.
Right. This I don't know about. But
In L.A. So that was another plot that was in the works,
Mhm.
and Von Marlowe would have been the patsy.
Mhm.
So now, how can you have a dead organization and these plots? And by the way, the Tampa plot is not even contested. The FBI writes in its reports, the Tampa plot, saying, how could the Warren Commission not even have looked into this, or the FBI, knowing that he attended Fair Play for Cuba Committee meetings, that he was a lone passenger on a plane, that he entered Mexico through Laredo. So they come up with this thing, and the word they use is egregious. That's not my word.
Egregious.
Egregious. So
let's just tell the audience that Kennedy was going to the Orange Bowl to present the Cuban flag to the Cuban exiles as part of the reason for him to go to Tampa.
I'm not sure if that wasn't a year before.
Oh, was that Miami?
That was 1962. I think that was with where Bosch would have bombed him. I think that was in 1962.
Okay.
But you're right that there was a motorcade in Miami.
Yes.
And then just a few days before Dallas, there was one in Tampa.
Right.
The one in Chicago was about 3 weeks before.
Right. That was, yeah.
So what you were seeing there is all these attempts, okay? And when you try and find out about these attempts, who would have all the information? The Secret Service, right? But they shredded all those.
They shredded everything.
They shredded everything.
Well, so did ONI, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I
Office of Naval Intelligence.
Yeah. So I guess the point being, if the odds that you're part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, if the odds are infinitely small, given that the Fair Play for Cuba was in its deathbed, the odds that Policarpo Lopez is also connected to the Fair Play for Cuba, and then Richard Case Nagel, and then Von Marlowe, and I have others too.
Ted Cruz's father.
Harry Dean. Harry Dean was part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. A guy called John Glenn, not the astronaut.
Right.
From Indiana. He's involved with some sort of rumor around a Mannlicher Carcano, and that there were hints. Like some of these prior plots are pretty well locked in. A few others are a bit iffy. Not my fault. They destroyed the files. But you have some newspaper articles on a previous plot in, where was it? Tennessee, I think.
Oh, at the Tennessee Valley Authority, somebody signed in Oswald's name.
Oh yeah, that's
what was that?
That was Oswald signed it at a nuclear facility.
Yeah.
Okay, and was it a museum or anyway? It was a nuclear. Yeah, there was something weird because his signatures were popping up.
Right.
And Oswald was rumored to be going to Washington. Okay. So he was even giving his changes of address to, the militant, and say, "Hey, I'm going to be moving to Washington."
That's right. The newspaper, The Militant.
Yeah. And his move would have coincided with a motorcade in Washington. Okay, so.
That's right. I forgot about that.
So, the whole idea here is, first of all, this is impossible. It's just impossible.
He's a chess piece that's being moved on a board.
He's moving around, and they have alternate plans. Okay, they have contingencies. I think Oswald was his best fancy possible, but they have contingencies.
Yeah.
Okay, and you can see that this is all turning into a frenzy. Okay, before the year of the election, they don't want Kennedy to make it out of 63 alive.
That's right.
Yeah,
I think everybody agrees on that.
That's the Fair Play. That's what got me interested.
That's what hooked you.
And I was able to find a thesis by a guy called De Benedictis, and he studied the Fair Play for Cuba, and that was his thesis. Great document. I read about the Socialist Workers' Party's attitude towards the Fair Play for Cuba. They had a chapter on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and they were a key sponsor. And they're the ones who said, "Oh no, we had decided in August or July that it should be only alive on paper.
Right.
Let's not put any more effort."
Well, doesn't Oswald write to them in New York about opening a chapter originally in New Orleans?
Well, yeah, he writes to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. A guy called Lee.
Yeah.
Something.
Yes.
What's
in New York.
The name? Anyway, but he and the guy says, "No, don't open there. It's too dangerous."
Yeah.
And he opens it up anyway, and so that's why the whole FPCC thing, I think, is a smoking gun.
Right. It is a smoking gun. And
I do. I'm convinced.
It's very rarely explored as to the structure and phoniness and what it is.
Yeah.
You know.
And there are documents there. So when you combine it, right, you have these these weird behaviors to be visible. And what do the Cubans, anti-Castro Cubans, and those who want to blame it on Castro say the second? Hey, he was part of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
First thing in the paper.
And they were saying, Castro, we know, helped finance it.
Well, they're trying to put that rope around Castro.
Oh, yeah, they're trying.
How quickly did that happen?
What?
Minutes after the assassination.
Minutes.
How long did it take the Fair Play for Cuba Committee to be in the meeting, in the newspaper?
And Ed Butler sends his recording right up to Washington.
The Inca recording of WD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, they say, hey, this is going to be our wonderful,
But does LBJ drive a stake through the whole thing when he becomes president?
Yes.
Because he doesn't need that any longer.
Well, look, the reason the Fair Play for Cuba Committee died quickly was a year later you had the missile crisis.
Right.
So, who's going to be wanting to support Castro after the missile crisis? But at the same time, it did scare the daylights out of Johnson, Kennedy, Khrushchev. So they didn't want to go that route.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think that Vietnam was something. Hey, you know what? How do I remain belligerent and with less risk or something? I don't know the whole thinking on why Vietnam, but not Cuba.
Well, they had moved from Korea to Vietnam. When they left Korea, they took all the armaments directly to Vietnam.
Okay, there you go.
Well, shiploads of armaments never came home.
Oh yeah,
they went directly to support the French.
Yeah. There you go. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then when the French left, we took over. When.
Yeah, and I guess there wasn't
the French losses mounted so badly.
I guess the ultimatum of saying, the Russians were saying, hey, okay, we'll scale down anything nuclear having to do with Cuba, but guarantee their peace and their
the
economy.
missile removals from Turkey.
Yeah. Right.
The Turkish missiles had to be removed.
Right.
So, but the Russians quickly came out after the assassination saying we had nothing to do with this, just to get on the record. Quickly.
Oh
yeah.
Yeah, I have documents on that. Another little thing. I mean, key with Mexico is what? That's again, because in Mexico, there's rumors that Oswald received payments from Cuban agents.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
There's rumors that he met when he went to the Russian consulate, that he met the head of assassinations.
Right.
Okay, Kostikov.
Yeah, Kostikov.
Yeah. So then he met him.
Of their wet program.
Yeah. And I have another article about his last letter to Washington. And I forget the name of the recipient of the letter, but he was being described as someone involved in assassinations stationed in Washington. So this whole, and I honestly think that that's why we have so many groups. Because if they had gone the Cuban invasion route, they wouldn't have minded that he had Confederates.
No, of course
that
not.
were that were pro-Castro.
They were trying to set it up so it looked like he had filed for a visa to flee through Mexico City to Havana and then eventually to Moscow. That was the structure.
But now all of a sudden, Lyndon Johnson says, no, we're going the lone nut route. Okay, there's a Zapruder film. There's the Dallas Doctors. There's Bethesda.
They start working in reverse.
Witnesses.
They work backwards.
And he can't talk. We got to eliminate him because if he talks, he's eventually going to talk about his missions.
Well, they were going to move him from the jail to the other building on Monday to have a 3-hour press conference. Yeah. I mean, that's why Ruby kills him on Sunday night. Yeah. That's the last chance he gets. Yeah. I mean, Ruby calls up the front desk of the police station and the guy says, "Who's this, Jack Ruby?" Yeah. So he tried to get out of it, Ruby. Yeah. But eventually he had to do the job.
I don't know if there's anything else.
No.
Garrison had an awful lot on the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
Yes.
And so lately I've been researching.
You have the Garrison files, I understand.
Yeah.
The famous files.
Well, many were destroyed.
Yes.
Menno Sanic sent me them.
Right.
Anybody can get them.
Right. How many pages are they?
Oh, there's 8,000 or 9,000 pages.
I thought about 10,000 pages, yeah. Okay. I mean, Casablanca is New Orleans. I mean, at that time, Mexico City is kind of like Casablanca, too. These are nests of spies. Yeah. Right, Paul?
Yeah. And so then when you get into it, you say, well, if the FPCC wasn't Oswald's network, what was his network? And in the Garrison files, they give you an awful lot of insight because you get to know more about the international trademark.
Yes.
You get to know more about, you know, the whole anti-communist structure of New Orleans.
Just to give you a Canadian tidbit, Clay Shaw flew with Ferry after the Cuban embargo because they couldn't get nickel.
Yeah.
You know about this?
Yeah, I do.
And they flew up to Canada.
Freeport sulfur. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. You know about that, don't you?
Yeah.
Don't keep it secret any longer. You could tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a guy. I think the pilot was his name Kimball.
But some people allege that Ferry took some of those flights with him, with his plane.
Oh, yeah, there was to Cuba.
Yes.
And then there was another flight up to Montreal.
Yes.
Those flights. And the guy with Freeport's... Okay,
Freeport Sulfur, yeah.
Freeport Sulfur was one of these companies that has Rockefeller links.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, but that was very active in Cuba.
Right.
So it's one of these companies that hates Castro, just like United Fruit, which had sugar, and like everyone, you know, AT&T, you name it.
But they still had connections with Canada.
Yeah, so they wanted to buy this nickel plant or set something up through Canada.
Right.
Canada did not go on.
That's
on the embargo.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want this to get me into trouble, but I'm allowed to travel to Cuba, and I've been there. So
So you admit it? You admit it?
No, but I mean, you know, it's a great tourism destination. You know, I stick to the resorts, but the point being is that you know, Canada became the recipient of a few terrorism acts from the Cuban exiles in Miami.
Interesting.
Yeah, there was a bomb that went off in a travel agency.
Interesting.
Yeah, because are you sending tourists down there? We don't want you to help your economy.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. Well, there's also that they blew up some people in Washington, D.C. The long arm of Cuban intelligence went after Cuban exiles in the United States in the 80s.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. No, they were active.
Yeah. So that's, and now what I'm working on is what is that New Orleans network and how did it work? And, you know, it brings you back to Clay Shaw, Mr. Data Ferry, the usual, but you're starting to see the links right now. What's the crossover in the people that interacted between Miami, New Orleans, Dallas? If you start getting that picture and saying who did what, you're getting a much clearer picture of the operation.
Thank you. This is great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. That was perfect.